fellow history nerds, or maybe I should say GCSE students who had to choose history or geography and decided on history. So welcome to our video on Edward I. He is in your paper 2, along with Power and the People. I'm going to say what I always say, do it in whatever order you like, do the questions in whatever order you like. For the Edward paper, that means 4 questions. There's an interpretation, there's an explain the importance of something, there's write an account of something, and then there's a historical environment. More of that in a minute. 8, 8, 8 and 16 marks. Nice and easy to remember this one. So again, if you want to start with your banker and you know the historical environment will be coming up and it's 16 marks, then do that. Get that out the way and then go back to the others. Let me go through with you how to actually answer them. But before that, I want to cover the main themes. We've talked about these themes for the Edward module in your lessons. They are critical if you are going to hit the complex thinking that the top marks require. These are those preoccupations that Edward had in his reign. It's the reason we study Edward, because it's such a turning point in English history. And these really are the reasons, because so much happened within these different themes. You will remember that royal authority was a preoccupation of Edward's because his grandfather, King John, his father, Henry III, had the authority of the crown nibbled away. It had been eroded by civil war, by loss of land, by loss of credibility. Edward was preoccupied with restoring that, bringing that back to the crown, and with it, the obedience of the barons, the support of the barons, and ultimately his way was the only way. So that is really what everything comes down to for Edward. How does he achieve all of this authority? He has to protect and build the empire. The only bit of France that's left is Gascony. He has to protect that. But he grows his empire throughout his reign. He includes Wales then within the English Empire. As you know, he tries his best to take Scotland in with that as well. But keeping and growing the empire costs him in other ways. It costs him in terms of having to go to war to keep it and to achieve it. That costs lives, that costs a huge amount of money. So one of the things that you have to look at is what in the end, the deficit to Edward's reign is from war. And one of those deficits is how much money it costs him. He governs a very, very wealthy country at this time. The wool trade expands so much. There are so many opportunities for ordinary people. You remember Hugh Cock and people like him who move up through society because of the wool trade. Well, that's great, but Edward needs so much money for war, for his empire, that there are times within his reign where he loses some of that royal authority in his attempt to gain finance. So that's a big theme, a really important preoccupation. With all of this comes the barons and parliament. He needs the barons for money. He needs them for tax. He needs them to grant taxation through parliament. Parliament is a part of government that simply advises the king. But it's crucial. He cannot pass laws. He cannot raise finance without parliament, and it's the barons that run parliament. So that's important to him. Their support and their obedience is crucial. Government is simply the way that a king runs the country. The departments that he has, the courts, the financial departments, that's the nuts and bolts, the day-to-day. So that's where Richard Burnell sits. And law and order is part of this. You cannot govern a country that is out of order, that is not peaceful. So this is, again, after the civil wars, after the erosion of authority, the king, i.e. Edward, needs to restore some of that, and that again is an important part of his reign. The church formed part of parliament. You know how powerful the church was. Edward has a lot of wranglings with the church because of that strain between his authority and theirs. So that's a preoccupation and a major theme. As is religion, purely from the point of view that a pious king is valued by his people, because God would approve of a pious king. If God approves of a pious king, then God approves of his people, and that keeps them safe. That keeps England, in their mind, blessed by God, and that is something that is to be achieved and to be coveted. So these are the 8 themes of Edward's reign. Tie your questions into those 8 themes, but don't just think that by mentioning royal authority that's enough. You have to explain how these are important to him. More of that as we go through it. Hopefully you'll have remembered those. Okay, now the questions. Question 1. How convincing is interpretation A about X? Convincing means accurate. And we've talked before about the fact that the only way to test accuracy is to decide how the context, how what we as your history teachers have taught you compares to what you're reading in that interpretation. How are you going to evaluate the interpretation? You need to identify the argument, and you need to zoom in on those important parts of the argument that help you to infer what the argument is. So what is it? Where are the details in the argument that get you the inference? It's very, very similar in that respect to what we've talked about with sources. Once you've identified the argument and you've explained that in your answer, then you have to show what you know from your context that either supports or challenges it. Guys, if you can have a reason to support it and then a reason to challenge a detail within it, brilliant. If you can only come up with 2 reasons to support, that 2 is fine. Just make sure that you have 2 distinct either supports or challenges, okay? But don't tie yourself in knots trying to find a challenge if there isn't one. 2 supports is fine, okay? So that's question 1, 8 marks. Question 2. Explain what was important about something in the reign of Edward I. I've said to you here I want 2 GCSE paragraphs, and I do. So 2 reasons why something was important. But here's the thing. I don't want to hear everything that you know about that topic. What was important about the Jews and the expulsion of the Jews in the reign of Edward I. If you just tell me everything you know about them being abandoned on a beach and left to drown and wearing yellow badges, that's not telling me why they're important. I want to know why they were important in relation to Edward achieving his aims. So the fact that they stopped being financially beneficial to him, looking back to our main themes, is one of the reasons why he had them expelled. So there is why was it important. A second reason would be that it was a popular move with his barons who had their own debts wiped out at the same time. So it's about why these things are important to Edward and his aims and the wider themes, not just everything you know about something. Do that with 2 juicy paragraphs. Okay, question 3. When I was putting the suggested answer booklet together, one thing I found, and I loved this about it, was very often the evidence and even the points that I made for question 2 and what was important were almost identical to the write an account evidence and points. So that means, and it shows, there's not actually that much to learn. It's just about answering your question in the right way. Again, for this question, it's about 2 GCSE paragraphs. It's asking you to write an account of something that changed or a problem that was solved. So I want to know about one problem or change, what Edward did, and the consequence of that, the consequence for Edward, linking it to the wider themes. And then a second change or problem that was solved and the consequence of that. Okay, that's why it's very similar to question 2, because what was important is really about consequences, isn't it? So they are incredibly similar. Consequences is the key on this one. All right, my lovelies. That's question 3. Last question. As you know, this is our historic environment. It changes every single year. But you know, you can bank this, that whatever we've learned in our historical environment, whether it's about the Battle of Stirling Bridge, whether it's about London, whether it's about manor houses or merchants' houses, it doesn't matter. You know that your topic you've learned will come up on the paper. And it will be just like question 4 from the First World War paper, X, Y, or Z statement, how far do you agree? And all I want you to do is make sure that X, Y, and Z, so factor 1 has its own juicy paragraph with an interim judgment. Factor 2 has a juicy P paragraph with an interim judgment, and by the interim judgments I mean how far they show whatever the statement is, and then an overall judgment where you are linking your factors together. Did one cause the other? Did one accelerate the other? Was one the source of the change and therefore was the most important factor? The other one only accelerated that, for example. Okay, so it's just the same structure as you do for World War I paper question 4, and even for Power and the People question 4. So this is one that I know you know how to do, but it was worth going over again. Good luck with Edward. He'll be proud of you. Thank you.